I remember when Straight Outta Brooklyn was released, there was a good deal of hype surrounding it because this was a film that was directed by a 19-year-old filmmaker named Matty Rich. Straight Out Brooklyn was a film that won the Special Jury Award at Sundance Film, and it won Best First Feature at the Spirit Awards. And I believe it also had nominations at the Spirit Awards for Best Supporting Actor for George T. Odom, and Best Musical Score from Harold Wheeler. When I heard that a 19-year-old had directed a feature film, and it was a feature film that didn't get the widest of releases, but for an independent movie, I think it was distributed by Samuel Golden Films. I think that's the name of the company. There was a lot of talk for Straight Out Brooklyn. The quality of the film, overall it was received positively well, but, it was particularly for the fact that it was directed by someone who hadn't turned 20. And I thought that was, an incredible thing. Like, wow, like, that is quite the achievement. And on that alone, like, I was curious to see Straight Up Brooklyn. By the end of the year, it was released. I did get a chance to see a little bit of Straight Up Brooklyn. It actually was Christmas Day of that year. And I was at the house of extended family. Like the family on my mom's side, decided to hold a Christmas party. So after my family and I, my immediate family had Christmas at our place, we went ahead. At the time, we lived in Manhattan. We lived in Washington Heights, and we traveled all the way to I think it was in Queens, somewhere in Queens, to spend the remainder of Christmas, with my mom's extended family. Towards the end of the night, they had decided, my extended family, to play Straight Out Brooklyn. And I was intrigued, the moment they started playing the film. And I saw, oh, this film is really, really interesting. But I don't know if it was like how long into the film. Definitely wasn't that long. I think it was, I think I saw at least 10 minutes of it or so. And then we had to go, And I'm like, oh, man, like, I want to finish the rest of this movie. I've been wanting to see it for a while. But, we had to go home. And yeah, I hope I get my chance soon to go ahead and finish the rest of Straight Out Brooklyn, and it wouldn't be too long later. I think it was like 2 weeks later, whatever it was. Like I remember it was definitely January of the following year, and my dad had got a copy of Straight Out Brooklyn, and I think we might have watched that same day, that whole entire family, and. Like, I'm really not too sure what my parents thought about Straight Out Brooklyn. My brothers, like, they enjoyed it well enough. Um, and I definitely like fully enjoyed it. Like, and I don't know if it's film you could say you could fully enjoy in the sense that the film is actually quite heavy, like its subject matter, the things that are depicted on screen. So I guess it's something in terms of like being a fully joyful experience. I don't know if enjoy is the right word, but I definitely was full blown engaged with the movie. Found it really compelling, really captivating. And I became like an instant fan, like so much so that I know I annoyed my brothers greatly, and by extension, maybe my parents too. But my parents did have to watch it. But I did talk about Straight Up Brooklyn like quite a bit, but particularly around my brothers, and I played the film over and over and over again that year, and including the following years after, as much as I could, till I wasn't able to do so. And I did like ease back at a certain point, but yeah, that first year or so, like, played as much as I could, played scenes from as many of the scenes as I could, and yeah, my brothers were not thrilled. And I went ahead and I would talk about this film a lot and the greatness of Straight Up Brooklyn and Matty Rich and everyone else involved with the film. And particularly like the two people talk about the most was Matty Rich and Lawrence Gillard Jr. I believe this was the first film that Lawrence Gillard Jr. had ever done. I actually had seen him before I saw Straight Outta Brooklyn, but I wouldn't realize years later I'd saw him before. I thought Straight Outta Brooklyn was the first time I saw Lawrence Gillard Jr., but it wasn't. I had saw him in his commercial a few years prior. Lawrence Gillard Jr., he's great in the movie. He plays the main character, Dennis. You know, I assume like he's about to graduate high school, maybe 18-year-old who wants to get out of the projects in Red Hook, Brooklyn. He lives in this area that, I wouldn't say it's written with crime, but it's a place that, just has a lot of challenges, living there. And crime is definitely one of the challenges. And poverty and lack of opportunity and such. And he's just looking for a way to get out, to desperately get out. And I related to that so much. Not that I lived in the area quite where that he lived in, though at the time when I lived in Washington Heights, it wasn't exactly the safest of areas. In fact, when I lived there, it was the murder capital of New York City when I lived there. That's a story of another day. I understand being in a situation where you just so desperately want to get out of, whether it's a fucking crappy dinner job or whatnot, that you are looking for anyway to get out, and you might consider doing something that you shouldn't in order to get out, something impulsive, something that could eventually, just lead to a not so great outcome. And I definitely totally related to that. Even at that young age, I related to that. I was really young when I saw Straight Outta Brooklyn, and yeah, just other things about the character that even if I didn't relate to, I thought was really interesting. And he's just great. And I thought he was a star from the get go, and he was able to years later, carve out a good career as a character actor. He's probably best known to most people as Bob from the Walking Dead TV series. I had met Lawrence Gilbert Jr. once when I worked at a job a little bit over a decade ago. I was doing my thing in the main area, of the job that I was at, and he had walked in, and I recognized him. And I'm not somebody who normally stops celebrities for autographs or to talk to them. Usually, I see a celebrity, I see them, and I keep it moving. But no, I felt like I had to say something. And so wow, he's really here in front of me. So I approached him and I just said, hey man, I don't remember my exact words, but I love your work. And he said, thanks, and we exchanged, some words. It wasn't very long. And, just, seemed to be, a very approachable, nice guy, cool guy, and, after we talked just for a very little bit, he went his way and I went mine. And, but yeah, I still remember that, positive encounter. And yeah, he's one of my favorite actors. Gets nowhere near enough attention that he deserves. And yeah, I think Lawrence Gilbert Jr. is awesome. Another notable actor in Straight Outta Brooklyn. Another awesome performance is George T. Odom. God rest his soul. He passed away some years back, and he plays the father, Ray, a guy who definitely is battling some demons, and yeah, just the effect that has on him and has on his family, has on Dennis. And yeah, he just gives a powerful performance, tragic performance in this film. He's definitely one of the highlights in this movie, along with Lawrence Gilbert Jr. and the other actors too. The cast of this movie is just strong across the board. That's not something you see a whole lot, even in general, no matter how big the budget is on the film. But it's often harder to see in films that are of a certain budget. I believe Straight Outta Brooklyn, and I could be very wrong about the figure, but I think it cost about $500,000 or under. Yeah, and the fact that Matty Rich, a first-time director who might have been they were saying he was a 19-year-old director, but this was in '91, and his birthday hadn't came yet, so he would have turned 20 later that year. But basically, Straight Outta Brooklyn had to have been filmed no later than 1990. So it's possible Matty Rich, could have been 19 when he filmed it, but he also could have very well been 18, in 1990. So regardless, 18 or 19, the fact that he was that young and he directed a film this strong, with a cast that strong and direction that, assured and competent and more than competent is, it's pretty amazing. Yeah, I don't know. That's just something that definitely should be acknowledged, regardless of how you feel about the movie. That the fact that a 19-year-old or anyone, regardless of the age, just makes a competent movie. Because directing is really, really, really hard. And it's like a minor miracle. If you get any film finished, that in itself is an amazing achievement, because filmmaking is fucking hard. Filmmaking is definitely fucking hard. So when Straight Outta Brooklyn was released, I remember there was hype about how Matty Rich, would be the who's also the writer of the film as well. He was heralded to be the next Spike Lee, and that didn't quite happen. Like, I don't know, when people say like someone's the next something, like people need to be very careful with that type of wording, because no one could be the next anything. Whoever that person who you're saying they're the next, they can never be that person, because that person is that person, and everybody's their own person. Everybody does their own thing. They're just to say like this is the next Spike Lee, this is the next Tarantino, Spielberg, whatever. Like, no, they won't be because they're not them, but also the people who you compare it to them, they're not them either. Like, everybody's their own thing, and I get, I know what they mean when they say that. Like, they're gonna be the next ones, in their field or craft or whatever. They're gonna be the next ones to make an impact and whatever. I get that, but people need to be careful with that type of thing. And Matty Rich, didn't end up being the next Spike Lee in terms of like just being a filmmaker. It's a very different type of filmmaker. And in terms of like, I guess, impact, being the next great black filmmaker or next filmmaker who has social messages. I like, however the people had, referred him as, like hoping he would be in whatever context. It didn't happen. Like, he had his own path. After Straight Up Brooklyn, the world was waiting on like his sophomore effort, and that was The Inkwell. I, to this day, have not finished The Inkwell. I remember like a few years after I first saw Straight Up Brooklyn, The Inkwell, it was showing on, I think it was Showtime, and I started watching it. But then, like, I don't know, like, I got kind of disinterested. I can't say I was bored, but I wasn't like fully engaged, and I think I maybe got like 20 minutes in or something, and then I think I turned to something else, and I told myself, I'll get back to this movie, like, it'll air again and I'll finish it then. And it's been many years later, and I have yet to do that as at the time of this recording. I definitely will finish The Inkwell, but The Inkwell, it didn't do well at the box office. It didn't do well critically. It didn't do well with Matty Rich's fans, audiences. And after The Inkwell, Matty Rich, at least in terms of being a director, feature film director, he disappeared. And I remember like find that to be quite sad. I thought this was a guy with a lot of talent. Like, he made, to me, made one of the best first feature debut films from a director, and he did have a lot of potential. And for one reason or another, he wasn't able to do so. And I thought, that was, quite a loss for cinema. I thought, like, and still believed that, he had a voice worth listening to. And he was, like, still really so young. It's like, he should be doing, like, a whole bunch of films and other projects and stuff. And I remember just years go by and not hearing anything. And then I remember many years later, I think this was, like, somewhere in the 2010s, I had come across an interview with Matty Rich. He was talking about his time from, out of the public spotlight. And one of the things he had talked about was creatively he was getting back on his feet. And, he was going forward to, making more stuff in regards to, I guess, making things like cinematically, like, getting another feature film off the ground. I remember reading about how also like in the time between that interview, in Straight Out Brooklyn, like he had gotten involved with making video games, and he had there was this one video game which I think was called 187 or Die. I remember hearing about that game years before, but I didn't know that Matty Rich was involved. And he produced some other games as well, distributed games. Like, he had his own gaming company, and he released a few games, and he did some other stuff here and there. I was really like happy to hear that he wanted to get back into the director's chair, make another film. And so the other film he's made since Straight Up Brooklyn, besides The Inkwell, is Birth of the Black Underground. I'm not really too sure what it's about, but at the time of this recording, I believe it's supposed to be playing at some film screening somewhere. I definitely look forward to seeing it, and it is really good seeing Matty Rich back in the director's chair and have a film that's completed for the world to see. Getting back to Straight Out Brooklyn, though, I've kind of veered off course from talking about the film. Yeah, it's just like, why do I love Straight Out Brooklyn? Besides the fact of the strong acting and the strong directing, just the story. The story is really compelling. Like I was saying before, just, somebody who is so, adamant, like getting out of a bad situation, and just the lengths they'll go to escape, to be free. And just find a way that Dennis's story unfolds to be really riveting stuff. I also like the fact that, it was shot in New York. I live in New York. I live in Queens. I don't live in Brooklyn. I haven't been to Brooklyn too many times, but I've been there enough. And, Brooklyn, like all of New York, to me is home. Just always great to see my home state, being shown on screen and for other people to see. Another reason why I love Straight Up Brooklyn is that it helped to launch, pioneer, or maybe if not launch, but redefine a series of films in the 1990s where some people would call them hood movies. I'm not sure that's the term I would use, but basically movies where you would have usually young black men who would be in working class neighborhoods, impoverished neighborhoods that would have challenges with crime, with over policing, with lack of opportunities, places that were just left to rot. And these young men would do their best to try to get away, to try to help their families get away, to live a life without constant worry, without constant fear, without constant conflict, to live a life in all the best ways that is meant to be lived, to live free. Several weeks later, after the release of Straight Up Brooklyn, there was the release of the monumental Boys in the Hood, directed by John Singleton, another one of the best, greatest all-time feature film debuts by a filmmaker. And he was really young at the time too. I think he was 25 or younger when that film was released. The following year, you had Juice, directed exceptionally well by Ernest Dickerson, who also, fun fact, was the second unit camera operator on George Romero's Day of the Dead. And Juice was also the film where Tupac Shakur did his first leading role playing Bishop. And Tupac Shakur is just awesome in that movie. The whole cast of Juice is awesome. Juice is awesome. Following Juice, there was also more films that were released, like the year after that, one of the greatest films to me of all time, Menace to Society, directed by the Hughes brothers. That film is just something else. That was also their feature film debut, and they were really young at the time as well. I believe they were also under 25. Even though Menace to Society may be the best movie in this genre of film, but my personal favorite, the one I'm most nostalgic for, the one I have the most affinity for, the one I have the most emotional connection to, is Straight Out Brooklyn. Straight Out Brooklyn is just an amazing film to me. I cannot forget to mention that it's bolstered by a really moving score by Harold Wheeler. This score to me is spectacular. Straight Outta Brooklyn may be a film that may not be spoken about enough in too many places, but it's still a film that will always have a place in my heart.